The curtains in Marcus Ellington's penthouse had not been opened in 7 years. They were not ordinary curtains either. They were heavy, custom-made, thick enough to block even the most determined rays of New York sunlight. From the street, below, the building's glittering facade mirrored the city's restless energy, but on the top floor, behind those drapes, the world was suffocated in shadow. It wasn't darkness by accident. It was darkness by design. Marcus Ellington was one of the wealthiest men in America, a black tech CEO whose genius had turned a startup into an empire. His face had once graced magazine covers, his story praised as the blueprint of ambition fulfilled. But inside this fortress of glass and steel, there was no celebration. Success was just a number on a ticker screen. The true wealth he longed for was something no stock surge could deliver. He sat in his walnut-paneled study, the silence of the room pressing down on him like weight on his chest. The city below pulsed with horns, sirens, and laughter, life in motion, but in here there was only stillness. His hands rested on the arms of a leather chair, polished so often it gleamed like oil. Yet his reflection in the window was nothing but a weary man staring at what he could never touch. Upstairs, faint sounds drifted through the ceiling. His twin boys, Caleb and Joshua, were 7 years old now. Born blind, they lived in a world without outlines or color, a void that stretched endlessly. Their childhood should have been filled with scraped knees, running feet, and shouts echoing down hallways. Instead, the sound that reached Marcus most often was muffled crying, the kind that burned low, steady, like rain falling on stone. He had spent millions chasing a miracle. The best doctors in Manhattan, Boston, even Geneva had filed into his life with polished shoes and clipped tones. They reviewed scans, whispered in corners, then spoke to him with clinical certainty. Impossible. They will never see. Each verdict carved deeper into him, leaving wounds money couldn't heal, $15 million, gone in surgeries, experimental therapies, devices promising breakthroughs. What did he have to show for it? Thicker stacks of failed reports, and the gnawing fear that all he had built, all the mountains he had climbed, meant nothing because the 2 lives that mattered most were forever trapped in darkness, and always, there was the ghost of his wife, Simone. She had died giving birth to the twins. One moment, her laughter filled their home like sunlight. The next, she was gone. In the delivery room, joy and grief had collided so violently that Marcus never recovered. Every milestone of his company's success since then, every accolade, every investor's praise, was followed by the same cold echo. She should be here. The penthouse, once designed for laughter and light, had become a mausoleum of grief. Edges of furniture were padded, hallways cleared, rugs secured, all practical adjustments to protect the boys. But the curtains, those suffocating curtains, were a monument to despair. Doctors had warned, light can hurt their eyes. And so Marcus sealed the world away, as if hiding the sun itself could protect them. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the study window, eyes unfocused on Central Park below. The roses on the balcony had bloomed, spilling red against green, but their beauty felt unreachable. He had learned not to linger on such things. Beauty was cruel when the ones you loved most could never share it. The intercom buzzed suddenly, slicing the quiet. Security's voice came through. "Mr. Ellington, there's an applicant here for the maintenance position." A minor interruption, Marcus thought. His empire ran like a Swiss clock, every part precise, every piece replaceable. What was a janitor in the machinery of a billionaire's household? A cog, a background note, barely worth his attention. And yet in that moment, what seemed a trivial encounter would become the first crack in the walls he had built around his life. For now, he didn't know that. He only knew the silence pressing against his chest, the sound of his children's quiet sobs overhead, and the weight of a world where billions of dollars could buy everything, except hope. The elevator doors slid open with a metallic sigh, spilling pale light onto the marble floor of Ellington Tower's lobby. It was an ordinary morning in Manhattan, but for Aisha Carter, it felt like standing on the edge of something uncertain. She clutched a plain canvas tool bag, its seams worn smooth from years of work, and tightened the ponytail that kept her. Hair pulled neatly back. Around her, men in tailored suits swept past without glancing, their eyes glued to phones, their shoes clicking sharp against marble. She knew the type. They carried themselves like the world bent beneath their stride. A janitor in worn sneakers, no matter how clean, barely registered in their universe. The security guard at the reception desk finally looked up, squinting at her visitor badge. "Service entrance is around back," he muttered. The words were mechanical, but the tone was edged, like a blade slipped casually into the air. Aisha didn't flinch. She raised her chin, her voice steady. "I have an appointment with Mr. Marcus Ellington." That name, spoken aloud, froze the guard. His eyes flicked from her badge to her face, then back again, uncertain. There was a pause, the kind that stretched, long enough for humiliation to seep in if you let it. But Aisha didn't. She simply stood there, calm, rooted like she had learned to be in a world that tried to sweep her aside at every turn. The guard cleared his throat. "Right. My apologies, ma'am. Elevator to the penthouse, this way." The word ma'am came late, reluctant, but it didn't matter. Aisha followed the gleaming corridor toward the private lift, her steps quiet but deliberate. The ride upward was soundless, but her heart beat like a drum. She had cleaned offices, schools, and apartments all her life, but this was the realm of the untouchable. Marcus Ellington wasn't just a billionaire. He was a symbol, the kind of man newspapers wrote about and rivals envied. The weight of his world pressed on her as the elevator climbed, floor by floor, as if she were being carried into another dimension. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a corridor lined with oil paintings, moody landscapes, gilded, frames, the kind of art people nodded at without understanding, but priced in millions. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive she couldn't name. Celia Carter, the house manager, waited at the end of the hall, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Celia had the polished stiffness of someone who had run households longer than most people had been alive. She eyed Aisha with professional courtesy, but her voice was brisk. "Mr. Ellington is punctual," she said, as though punctuality were both a virtue and a warning. "And this house has rules." Aisha nodded. "I understand." But even as she spoke, her eyes were scanning the space, catching details most people overlooked, the rounded corners of furniture, the padded edges of tables, the deliberate emptiness of hallways. It was a house arranged for children who lived. Without sight, it was a house designed around grief. When Marcus Ellington finally appeared, it was like watching the air shift. He moved with the precision of a man used to commanding rooms, his navy suit pressed, his tie knotted tight. But his face carried a weariness that money couldn't polish away. His eyes flicked over her, measuring, calculating, as if he could rid her soul the way he read stock reports. "Miss Carter," he said, extending a hand. His voice was low, controlled. "Thank you for coming." His grip was firm but not warm. He motioned toward the study. They entered together, and he gestured for her to sit. He flipped open a slim folder with her resume, scanning it as though it were a set of quarterly numbers. 3 floors, 12 bedrooms, library, 2 offices, salary is $3,000 a week, weekends off. His tone was matter-of-fact, stripped of embellishment. Then he leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "One condition. You do not interfere with my children's therapy." They have routines, schedules, and rules. I won't allow anyone to plant false hope in their lives. Do you understand me?" The words hit with a force greater than any boardroom declaration. They weren't just rules, they were shields, shields forged in pain, fear, and a desperation too deep to name. Aisha met his gaze without flinching. "I don't make promises I can't keep," she said. "I'll do my job, and I'll respect your family's pain." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the faint recognition of someone speaking with more weight than her. Position suggested, but he closed the folder with a soft snap. "You start tomorrow." As Aisha walked the hallway, Celia offered her a polite nod, but another figure stepped from the kitchen. Martha, the nanny, a white woman in her 50s, dressed in a crisp uniform. She glanced at the tool bag in Aisha's hand, her smile thin. "We keep things a certain way here," Martha said. The words floated like a warning, the implication sharp. "Don't change anything, especially not you." Aisha returned a small, polite smile, but she felt the sting. She had lived with that undertone her whole life. Words dipped in sugar, but meant to bruise. That night, in her small staff quarters, Aisha opened a worn wooden box she carried everywhere. Inside were scribbled notes from years ago. Her own. Experiments teaching her younger brother Malik, who had been low vision, a flashlight, a toy that clicked, black and white contrast cards. Memories wrapped in grief, for Malik had died young, struck down in an accident before his potential could fully unfold. She touched the cards, her breath steady. New York was a city where light always found cracks, no matter how thick the walls. And though she had promised not to interfere, Aisha Carter knew something deep in her bones. In this penthouse drowning in shadow, there were cracks. And where there were cracks, light could slip through. She whispered into the silence, half a prayer, half a vow. "If I'm given the chance, I won't waste it." And somewhere above, in the room where two boys rocked themselves to sleep in endless darkness, faint sobs echoed, like a call waiting for its answer. The next morning, the penthouse awoke in silence. Not the ordinary quiet of dawn, but a silence so thick it pressed against the walls like a living thing. The curtains were drawn tight as always, sealing away Manhattan's golden morning. In the Ellington home, daylight was not welcome. It was treated like an enemy. Aisha rose early, slipping into her plain white shirt and sturdy shoes. She wasn't nervous. She'd worked too many jobs to let nerves dictate her, but something inside her thrummed, as though today held more weight than scrubbing floors and polishing glass. She could feel it in her chest, an intuition she'd learned never to ignore. Celia met her in the kitchen, her posture crisp, her words polite but brisk. "Coffee?" she offered, though her tone carried more ritual than warmth. Aisha thanked her, sipped once, then set the cup down. She wasn't here for comforts. As Marcus passed through, phone pressed to his ear, he offered the briefest of nods before disappearing toward the study. His voice was low, authoritative, the kind of tone that had commanded boardrooms and built empires. Yet even in that fleeting glance, Aisha caught the faint shadow clinging to him, a man who had everything except the one thing that mattered. She unpacked her bag, spray bottles, cloths, a mop, and, tucked discreetly at the bottom, a small notebook, black and white contrast cards, and a clicking toy top. She told herself she had brought them only out of habit. A keepsake of her brother Malik, a reminder of what she once knew. But deep down, she understood. Tools sometimes wait for their moment. As she moved through the penthouse, dusting, wiping, aligning, she noticed the same details she had the night before. Padded edges, widened spaces, cleared paths. A house designed not for living, but for surviving. It was too quiet, though, unnaturally so, and it made her pause. Then she heard it, a sound, faint but undeniable, drifting down from the second floor. Muffled sobs, two voices in tandem, breaking the silence like water seeping through stone. Aisha froze. She wasn't supposed to interfere. Marcus's warning still rang in her ears. Do not interfere with my children's therapy. Yet her body moved before her mind could stop it, her steps light as she followed the sound down the hall. The family room door was ajar. She peered inside. Two small figures curled in oversized armchairs, Caleb and Joshua. Their tiny bodies rocked. In the rhythm of self-comfort, their faces tilted downward as though pulled by gravity itself. And across from them sat Martha, the nanny, her face washed in the glow of a phone screen. Her voice cut through the room without lifting her eyes. Stop crying. You know it won't change anything. The words were sharp, casual cruelty disguised as discipline. She didn't move closer, didn't touch them, didn't see them. Aisha's stomach tightened. She stepped back, hand gripping her spray bottle, knuckles pale. For a moment, she told herself to walk away, to remember her place. She was the janitor, the help, not family, not therapist. But then instinct pulled her forward. She squeezed the bottle. Psst, psst, a clean, crisp sound cutting the heavy air. Both boys lifted their heads instantly, not toward Martha, not toward the sound of the phone, but toward her, their faces aligned, with the rhythm of the spray, as if reaching through darkness for something sharp and new. "Hello there," Aisha whispered, her voice low, gentle, like she was speaking to shadows. "I'm Aisha. I came to make this room clean and fresh." Caleb's face turned toward her with uncanny precision. "Where? Where's Martha?" His voice was cautious, yet curious. "She'll be right back," Aisha said softly. "Do you want to help me listen to the sounds?" She squeezed again. "Psst," Joshua giggled, a small sound but alive, uncoiling something in the air. Caleb tapped his fingers to the rhythm on the chair arm, mimicking the spray's beat. For the first time in that house, laughter spilled out. Light as sunlight after a storm. Aisha's chest tightened. This was no miracle, no sudden revelation, just a crack in the void, a sound cutting through despair. But cracks mattered. Where there were cracks, light could slip through. She glanced at the heavy curtains lining the far wall. Thick fabric drawn shut, a fortress against the day. The thought rose inside her like a spark, quick and dangerous. What if? But she swallowed it down. Not yet. Not here. This was their first step, and she would not run ahead of them. For now she gave them rhythm. Rhythm of sound. Rhythm of trust. She tapped gently on the table. Tap, tap, tap. Then she stopped. Caleb listened, tilted his head, and tapped back. Tap, tap. Joshua clapped, laughter bursting brighter. Aisha's eyes stung. She smiled. "Excellent." Her whisper was barely audible. The air in the room shifted like something invisible had awakened. For 7 years, this house had been ruled by silence, by grief, by resignation. But in that moment, in that room, it was no longer absolute. And somewhere deep inside, Aisha Carter made a vow without speaking it aloud. Within hours, something would happen that would make this entire household stagger, and it would begin with her hand on a curtain, opening the smallest line of light. The family room was too quiet. After the laughter faded, after Martha's muttered disapproval and hurried footsteps left the doorway, Aisha remained still, seated between the twins like a sentinel. Caleb leaned forward in his chair, his small hands drumming against the armrest, while Joshua tilted his head in that uncanny way, as though listening to a song only he could hear. Aisha's fingers itched. Her gaze drifted again to the curtains, towering floor-to-ceiling drapes of velvet, heavy enough to smother even the boldest daylight. They stood like guards, sealed tight, the embodiment of Marcus Ellington's grief, of years of doctors. Warnings of fear calcified into ritual. Light hurts their eyes. That phrase echoed in her memory, whispered by Martha earlier, clung to by the household like scripture. But was it truth, or a curse no one had dared to question? Aisha's pulse quickened. She remembered Malik, her little brother, how he had pressed his small palms to her cheeks and whispered, "Tell me where the sun is, Aisha. I want to feel it too." She had guided him once, through shadows and light, teaching him to recognize brightness by warmth, by rhythm, by trust. He'd been so close before fate took him away. Now here sat Caleb and Joshua, two boys rocking between despair and curiosity, their faces turned toward her, waiting, though they didn't know what for. She leaned closer, her voice a hush. "Kids, let's try a new game. If it feels uncomfortable, you say stop. Right away, do you understand?" Both boys nodded, solemn as judges. Aisha rose slowly, each step toward the window, like stepping onto a wire stretched high above the city. She reached out with both hands, her fingers sinking into the heavy fabric. The curtain resisted, thick and immovable, as if it too feared what lay beyond. Her heart hammered. This was breaking a rule. No, this was detonating it. If Marcus walked in now, if Martha returned, everything she had built in a single day would collapse. But she couldn't ignore the pull inside her, the voice that said, "Try." She pinched the fabric with trembling fingers and drew it back. Just an inch, snap, a thread of light no wider than a pencil, slipped into the room and lay across the carpet like a blade of gold. It was thin, fragile, almost nothing, and yet it changed everything. The boys reacted instantly. Both faces turned toward it, their chests rising sharply, their rocking halting as though the room itself had shifted. Caleb whispered, breathless, "Something feels different." Joshua trembled, his voice a mix of fear and wonder. "It's brighter." Aisha's throat tightened. She stepped carefully into the beam, letting her shadow fall across it. Caleb gasped. "Now darker." His words spilled out, urgent, certain. Joshua leaned forward, tilting his head. "It feels like someone walked between us and something." His voice quivered, yet his lips curved upward in a smile. Tears welled in Aisha's eyes. She had prepared herself for screams, for pain, for the old belief to tighten like chains, but there was none. No agony, no recoil, only recognition, only discovery. She wanted to fling the curtains wide, let the sun flood in, but she swallowed the impulse. Too much, too fast, could shatter trust. She closed the slit gently, the golden line vanishing back into velvet. Then she knelt before them, her hands clasping theirs. "Thank you. That's enough for today." Joshua's lips trembled. "But I want to know more." "You will," Aisha promised, her voice steady though her heart raced. "But on your terms. Always safe, always gentle." She reached for her notebook, scribbling furiously. Light, yes. Dark, yes. Shadow movement, yes. Attitude, curious, not afraid. The door creaked open behind her. She turned, pulse spiking. Martha stood in the threshold, eyes narrowed, her face blanching as Caleb blurted out, "Martha! Light didn't hurt. Miss Aisha showed us." The nanny froze. Then her face hardened, her voice laced with fury. "You had no right." Before Aisha could respond, hurried footsteps thundered down the stairs. Marcus Ellington appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his face carved with shock. His eyes moved from Aisha to his sons, then to the closed curtain. "What is happening?" "Here!" His voice cut the air like glass shattering. Aisha rose slowly, her voice measured, each word carrying the weight of what had just occurred. "We tried a tiny light, just a slit. They could differentiate light from shadow." The room fell still. Joshua, trembling but resolute, looked at his father. "Dad." "I can see light," Caleb added, quieter but firm. "I can feel when it gets brighter." The words hit Marcus like a blow. For 7 years he had lived in darkness, in despair, drowning in the certainty of impossible. And now, in a single breath from his son's lips, that certainty cracked. Tears blurred his vision as he sank to his knees before them. His voice trembled, raw, stripped of all the armor wealth and power had given him. Did anything hurt? Was it too bright? No, Caleb whispered. It was just different. Marcus turned to Aisha, his lips quivering, his world shifting under him. Can you do it again? Her answer was simple. Only if they want me to. Joshua nodded. Caleb squeezed her hand. She returned to the curtain, drew back the same narrow slit. The golden thread spilled across the room once more, and once again 2 small faces turned toward it, eyes unseeing yet sensing, smiles breaking like dawn. And in that instant the Ellington home staggered on its axis. 7 years of silence cracked open by a line of light no thicker than a finger. The penthouse had never breathed this way before. The next morning, the curtains were no longer sealed in suffocating layers. Instead, thin intervals of light streamed carefully through, just enough to sketch faint shapes across the carpet. Caleb and Joshua stood by the window, their small fingers tracing the invisible edges of brightness, giggling each time the clouds shifted and shadows brushed over their skin. Marcus watched them from the doorway, his throat tight. He had spent millions on world-renowned specialists, on equipment, on therapies that left his boys in tears. But what had shifted their world wasn't a surgeon's scalpel or a clinical trial. It was a janitor with a notebook and a belief in gentleness. Yet even in that fragile joy, Marcus felt the familiar claw of dread. He had built his empire on logic, on numbers, on control. And what had just happened here? A breach of rules, a gamble, a miracle, yes, but one that came wrapped in risk. By afternoon, the risk knocked on his door. Martha had wasted no time. Within hours of witnessing the light game, she had called Dr. Henry Collins, the head pediatric ophthalmologist who had overseen the twins' case since birth. His voice had been sharp, impatient, and his presence soon arrived over the phone, crisp and cutting through the speaker in Marcus's library. "Mr. Ellington," Collins began, his tone bristling with authority, "I've heard deeply disturbing reports. A housekeeper," he spat the word as if it were poison, "is conducting experiments with your children. This is reckless, dangerous, unlicensed." Marcus stood rigid, phone on speaker, Aisha nearby with her notebook open. The twins sat in the corner, playing softly with a ball that clicked as it rolled. "I witnessed it myself," Marcus replied, his voice controlled but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "My sons distinguished light from dark, shadows too." Repeatedly, on the other end, silence lingered for a beat too long. Then Collins scoffed. "Parent videos are not evidence. Children with cortical blindness display random head movements. You are mistaking coincidence for vision. This false hope will break them." Aisha stepped forward, steady as ever. "We ran repeated trials. Same stimulus, same response, consistency across multiple sessions. That is not random." Collins's voice sharpened, now tinged with something darker than concern. "Miss Carter, is it? You are not licensed. You are playing doctor in a billionaire's penthouse, jeopardizing 2 vulnerable boys. If this continues, I will notify the State Medical Board and Child Protective Services. Do you understand the seriousness of this?" The threat hung heavy in the room, like a noose waiting to tighten. Caleb flinched, catching only fragments of the conversation. "Miss Aisha, did we do something wrong?" His small voice cracked Marcus's heart. "No, baby," Aisha whispered, crouching beside him, her tone firm enough to anchor him. "You did everything right." Marcus's jaw clenched. He had bowed to doctors before. He had listened, obeyed, begged, but this was different. This wasn't science speaking, it was authority protecting itself. "Dr. Collins," he said slowly, "I will be scheduling an independent evaluation. Manhattan Children's Hospital, Dr. Anna Brooks, Collins bristled audibly. Brooks, she's a fringe name, idealistic. Don't let your desperation cloud judgment. If you continue down this road, I will intervene. Click, the line went. Dead. The silence that followed was thick and trembling. Martha stood by the door, arms crossed, her face a mask of satisfaction and fear. Celia lingered in the background, her eyes brimming with quiet rebellion. Aisha broke the silence first. She placed her notebook on the desk, flipping it open. Session notes, trial clips, latency data, timestamps, all logged. If they come, we don't argue with feelings, we show evidence. Her calmness steadied the air. She was not triumphant, not reckless. She was precise, as meticulous as a scientist. Marcus looked at her then, really. Looked, and for the first time in years, felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not just hope, trust. By evening, the knock came again. This time it wasn't Collins's voice on a phone. It was the State Medical Board and Child Protective Services, standing in Marcus Ellington's grand hallway. Two officials, Dr. Mark Freeman, tall and formal, and Dana Lewis, a woman whose voice carried both professionalism and warmth. Their badges gleamed, their expressions stern. "We received a complaint," Freeman said bluntly. "Unlicensed medical activity. Potential risk to minors." Martha's lips twitched in something like vindication, but Aisha did not flinch. She set her notebook down on the polished table, slid her phone beside it, and met Freeman's eyes with quiet resolve. "No medical equipment, no invasive procedure," she said evenly. "Sensory play only. Documented. Gentle. Child consent. Respected. Every session timed, recorded, and logged." Dana leaned in, flipping through the notebook with careful hands. "Do you have a safety plan?" Aisha slid a sheet forward. 4-week protocol, 7 minutes max per session. Gradual. Lux increases through curtains only. Immediate stop at any distress. Children always choose. Freeman's brows furrowed as he scanned the pages, then looked to Marcus. "We'll need to see the children," Marcus signaled. Caleb and Joshua entered, holding hands, their steps hesitant but sure. Dana crouched low, her smile warm. "Hi, I'm Dana, not a needle doctor. Just here to make sure you're safe." The boys eased slightly. Aisha looked at them, her voice soft. "Do you want to play the tiny light game like before?" Both nodded. She cracked the curtain, the beam spilling faintly across the carpet. Caleb's head turned instantly. Joshua whispered, "Brighter." When Aisha slid her hand across the beam, Caleb spoke without hesitation. "Darker, like someone walked in front." Freeman scribbled, but his eyes softened. Dana smiled faintly. The boys looked safe and happy. Freeman closed his folder. "Preliminary view. No immediate harm. No evidence of unlicensed medical treatment. What we see is sensory play, documented carefully. Schedule a formal evaluation with an independent ophthalmology team." "Already done," Marcus replied. "Dr. Anna Brooks, Tuesday, 10 a.m. The officials exchanged glances, then nodded. Freeman's tone softened. "Good. Until then, keep everything non-clinical. Document thoroughly." When the door closed behind them, the air shifted again. Martha looked deflated, her arms limp, at her sides. Celia's eyes glistened as she whispered, "The children smiled today. I haven't heard that in years." Marcus turned to Aisha. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Thank you for asking the question no one else dared to." Aisha didn't smile. She wasn't triumphant. She was steady, writing another note in her book. Light plus shadow, yes. Fear, lower. Laughter, present. Because she knew this was only the beginning. Collins wasn't finished. Authority never yielded easily. And in the dark corners of the city, where pride and prejudice sat side by side, new plans were already forming to destroy her. The morning of the hospital visit began like a drumbeat in Marcus Ellington's chest. He had been awake since before dawn, pacing the penthouse like a caged man rehearsing arguments in his head. Money couldn't buy him control today. He had written billion-dollar contracts, delivered speeches before rooms of stone-faced investors, faced the press in hostile markets. But this was different. This was his son's future hanging on the edge of a scale. Caleb and Joshua sat at the kitchen table, dressed in their small navy sweaters, hair neatly combed by Celia's careful hands. They tapped their fingers on the surface in sync, humming softly to each other like they often did, a rhythm only they shared. Their laughter flickered between them, fragile but real. Marcus lingered at the doorway, watching, his throat thick, and Aisha, quiet, calm, unshaken, slipped her worn notebook into her bag, double-checking the USB drive that held every clip she had recorded. Her preparation was surgical. Timestamps, lux estimates, reaction notes, anxiety scores, all laid out, like a trial lawyer's evidence. She had no degree, no letters after her name, no polished credentials to wield, but she had data. She had the truth. The car ride down to Manhattan Children's Hospital was silent, except for the twins' questions. "Miss Aisha, will there be bright lights?" Caleb's voice trembled. "Not unless you say yes," she assured, squeezing his hand. "Every game stops when you want it to. Always." Joshua whispered, "Will the doctor be nice?" "She will listen," Aisha promised. Marcus said nothing. He stared out the tinted window at the skyline, its steel and glass towers cutting into the morning sky like blades. For the first time in his life, he realized how fragile skyscrapers were, how even giants could topple when foundations cracked. The hospital loomed ahead, a gleaming monument of glass panels and marble floors, its lobby buzzing with families, nurses and wheelchairs squeaking across tile. Marcus guided his boys inside, his large hands gentle on their shoulders. His heart pounded as though he were walking into court. At reception, Aisha stepped forward, sliding a neatly organized folder. Across the counter, Ellington, Pediatric Ophthalmology, 10 o'clock with Dr. Anna Brooks. The clerk blinked, momentarily surprised that it was not the billionaire father but the janitor presenting such precise documentation. She nodded, almost impressed. Moments later, the door opened. Anna Brooks stepped out, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes, brown hair tied back, and a voice that carried both warmth and authority. She crouched to the boy's level immediately. "Hi, Caleb. Hi, Joshua. I'm Anna. I don't do needle things. I just play with light and shapes. Does that sound okay?" The boys hesitated, then nodded. Marcus's shoulders eased, just a fraction. Anna ushered them into the testing room. It was not the sterile, blinding white chamber Marcus dreaded, but a warm space with wood accents, pastel walls, and toys arranged neatly on low shelves. The air felt human, not clinical. Before anything, Anna listened. Aisha summarized their home experiments, the slit of light, the shadows, the consistency of responses. She showed the clips, Caleb whispering, "darker," Joshua pointing toward brightness. She detailed the latencies, the repetition, the evidence of awareness. Marcus added softly, 7 years. No one ever asked them this way. Anna nodded, her expression grave yet hopeful. "We'll run 4 categories of tests," she explained, "all gentle, all with the boy's consent. Pupillary light reflex, optokinetic response, visual evoked potentials, full field stimulus. Thresholds. If they say stop, we stop." The twins sat in the chairs, small and tense, but holding each other's hands. Test 1, pupillary light reflex. Anna dimmed the room and used a soft, indirect light. "I'm shining this nearby," she whispered. "Not at you." The camera caught it. Caleb's pupil constricted faintly. Joshua's response was stronger. Anna smiled. PLR positive. The afferent pathway is intact. Marcus's breath hitched. It was the first objective evidence in 7 years. Test 2. Optokinetic nystagmus. A screen displayed slow-moving black and white stripes. Just watch if you can, Anna coaxed. Joshua's eyes flickered, faint movements tracking the pattern. Caleb's were weaker but present. Anna noted carefully. That's OKN. It means they can track large, high-contrast objects. Marcus gripped the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles whitened. His empire had never shown him numbers this beautiful. Test 3. Visual evoked potentials. Electrodes were fitted onto caps styled like game helmets. High-contrast patterns flashed slowly. The monitor bloomed with irregular but undeniable waves. Anna turned the screen toward Marcus. See these peaks? That's the brain responding to visual stimuli. He choked back a sob. For years he had stared at flat reports, at cold words, like absent and total blindness. Now the screen pulsed with possibility. Test 4. Full-field stimulus thresholds. The room darkened further. Gentle flashes of different intensities appeared. Caleb pressed a button hesitantly when he felt change. Joshua responded more consistently at lower thresholds. Their responses were logged with time stamps, their accuracy well above chance. Anna sat back, her notes complete. She turned to Marcus and Aisha, her eyes shimmering with quiet certainty. Based on PLR, OKN, VEP, and FST, both children have functional vision. Not full, but not zero, approximately 30%. The word shattered the prison Marcus had lived in. 30%. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Enough for windows, for sunlight, for shadows, for kites in the park. Enough. For a childhood not defined by endless night. Aisha's lips trembled, her hands pressed flat against her notebook to keep them steady. She whispered, I knew it. I knew there was light still inside them. Anna wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice firm. 7 years ago, the neonatal note flagged possible light perception. That should have prompted follow-up. It didn't. The file was closed as total cortical blindness. That was a failure, not of biology, but of diagnosis. Marcus leaned back, eyes wet, his chest heaving. So, we lost time. Anna met his gaze. Yes, but neuroplasticity at 7 still gives us a window. What matters is what we do now. In that moment, Marcus Ellington, billionaire, CEO titan, was no more than a father breaking open under the weight of hope. He covered his face with both hands, tears spilling freely. Aisha, steady as ever, pulled her notebook close. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a vow. Then we go slow, gentle, document everything. No assumptions, no fear. We let science speak. Anna nodded. Exactly, and I will stand with you. But outside the room, in the buzzing veins of Manhattan, Dr. Henry Collins was already moving. His pieces, emails drafted, phone calls placed, headlines sharpened. If the truth came to light, it would not just expose a diagnosis, it would expose him. And men like Collins did not go down without a war. The Ellington penthouse, once a mausoleum of silence, now pulsed faintly with life. The curtains were thinner, the air warmer, the children's laughter echoing in places that had forgotten it. Caleb and Joshua's giggles spilled down the marble staircase as they experimented with their light game, chasing sunbeams across the floor like hunters of invisible treasure. But joy never stays unchallenged. 2 days after Dr. Anna Brooks's evaluation, the first strike landed. Marcus sat in his walnut-paneled study when his phone buzzed. The headline blazed across the screen in bold black letters: Billionaire's twins, subjected to reckless home experiments conducted by housekeeper. Below it, the words cut deeper. Anonymous experts warn children face trauma from unproven methods. Marcus's stomach dropped. He clicked the article, eyes scanning furiously. Collins's fingerprints were all over it, though his name was never directly cited. Phrases like reckless maid and false hope dripped like acid, each sentence carefully sharpened to stab. He called Aisha into the study. She came, notebook in hand, eyes steady. Marcus handed her the phone. She read without a flinch, though her knuckles whitened slightly. They turned the miracle into a scandal, Marcus muttered, rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. They always do, Aisha said softly. Authority hates to be wrong, and when a black woman proves them wrong... She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Celia peeked in, holding a tray of tea. Her voice cracked. Marcus, the boys can't see this, can they? They'll hear it eventually. Marcus shook his head. They'll hear worse before this is done. By evening, cameras hovered outside the building. Reporters swarmed the sidewalk, shouting questions, waving microphones like weapons. Mr. Ellington, is it true your sons are being used as guinea pigs? Miss Johnson, are you experimenting on children without a license? Security shoved them back, but the frenzy only grew. Inside, Caleb tugged at Aisha's sleeve. Why are there people shouting outside? She crouched to his level, brushing his hair back gently. Because some people don't understand what we're doing yet. But don't worry, we know the truth, and we have proof. Joshua frowned. Did we do something bad? No, baby, she whispered, her voice breaking just a little. You did something brave. That night, as the city glowed with neon and sirens, Marcus sat on the balcony, phone in hand, scrolling through endless comments. Keep the help in her lane. What's next, TikTok doctors? Money makes fools of everyone. His empire had taught him how cruel anonymous voices could be, but this was his family, his sons, his only hope. Aisha stepped onto the balcony, setting her notebook on the table between them. You're not going to sleep if you keep reading those, she said. I built this company on image, Marcus muttered, his voice raw. On trust. And now, they're tearing us apart with 3 words. Reckless. Black. Maid. Aisha's gaze was calm, but her eyes burned with fire. Then we don't argue with words, we argue with evidence. She flipped her notebook open. Columns of data, carefully logged, stared back at him. Every trial, every response, every clip. They can twist headlines, but they can't twist the truth forever. Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time it was Anna Brooks. Her voice was sharp with urgency. Marcus, Aisha, Collins is pushing hard. He's already lobbying the medical board for an injunction to halt all home sessions. He's framing it as endangerment. If they agree, you'll be ordered to stop everything until a full hearing. Marcus's jaw clenched. He wants to freeze us in place, stall us until hope dies. Exactly, Anna replied. But I'll stand. With you, I'll present the data. Freeman, the board member who visited, saw the boys respond himself. He won't ignore that. Aisha leaned closer to the phone. What do we need? Documentation, witnesses, evidence of safety and courage, Anna said simply. When the call ended, the penthouse fell into a fragile hush. The twins had finally fallen asleep, curled together beneath soft blankets. But for Marcus and Aisha, the night was only beginning. At the dining table, they spread everything out, the notebook, the USB clips, the graphs, the session schedules. Marcus, once a man of cold numbers and stock prices, now studied latency charts and lux estimates as though they were earnings reports. He realized that, in a way, they were. Earnings of hope, dividends of courage. Aisha documented each detail with the precision of someone who knew her words would be doubted simply because of who she was. Her pen scratched steadily. Her notes, as careful as a surgeon's cut. Collins is coming for us. Marcus said at last, his voice low. Not just in court, not just with headlines. He wants to bury us, to make you disappear back into the role of the help, to make my boys. Statistics again. Aisha met his gaze. Her voice was quiet, but it carried steel. Then let him come. I won't vanish, and I won't let your sons live in darkness because a man in a white coat was too proud to admit he was wrong. Marcus studied her, seeing not just a janitor, not just a caregiver, but something rarer. A woman unshaken by storms, who could stare down authority without blinking. For the first time in years, he felt less like a billionaire and more like a father, standing beside someone who refused to let his children be erased. Down on the street, cameras flashed, headlines spun, prejudice roared. But in the quiet of the penthouse, two children dreamed of sunlight and shadows, while two adults prepared for war, because Collins had made his move, and soon they would make theirs. The collision point, the private miracle of light versus the brutal machinery of authority. The medical board hearing must feel like a courtroom drama, every word charged, every pause dangerous. This is where Aisha, the janitor, speaks truth in a place designed to silence her. It must feel heavy with suspense, power, and emotion, while still deeply human. The conference room of the New York State Medical Board smelled faintly of varnish and steel. Polished leather chairs ringed a long oak table, its surface shining beneath harsh overhead lights. The clock on the wall ticked with merciless precision, as though even time itself was waiting to pass judgment. Marcus Ellington adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket, his usual composure fraying at the edges. He had stood before boards of directors, senators, investors, yet this was different. Those battles had been about money. This one was about his sons. Beside him, Aisha Johnson sat with her notebook on the table, a simple pen tucked neatly across the spine. She wore no power suit, no gleaming jewelry, just a crisp blouse and the same quiet dignity she carried in every room. Yet her presence was magnetic, her eyes steady even as whispers darted around the chamber. To the men across the table, she was just the janitor. But to Marcus, to Caleb and Joshua, she was the only person who had cracked open the darkness. At the far end sat Dr. Patel, chair of the board, her gaze sharp as glass. To her right, Dr. Mark Freeman, the one board member who had witnessed the boys respond to light firsthand. On her left, two other commissioners shuffled papers, their faces unreadable. And then, across from Marcus and Aisha, sat Dr. Henry Collins, his lawyer in a grey suit beside him. Collins's expression was smooth, controlled, but his eyes flickered, with something between anger and fear. Patel opened the session. We are here to review allegations of unlicensed medical practice conducted in the home of Mr. Marcus Ellington, with potential risk to minors. We will hear testimony from Dr. Collins, Dr. Brooks, Mr. Ellington, and Miss Johnson. We remind all parties that this board bases its conclusions on evidence, not speculation. Collins's lawyer rose first. His voice dripped with condescension. Our position is clear. These children were diagnosed by a team of 15 specialists as totally cortically blind. The introduction of unsupervised, unlicensed methods by a housekeeper poses grave risks of psychological harm. Random head turns have been misinterpreted as vision. Hope, in this case, is not medicine. It is cruelty. Every word was a dagger, aimed at Aisha. She did not flinch. Freeman tilted his head. Dr. Collins, I reviewed the neonatal file myself. It included a note. Possible light perception to be investigated. Why was this not followed up? Collins's jaw tightened. The team later concluded no functional vision. That early note was inconsequential. Do you have documentation of that follow-up? Freeman pressed. Collins shifted in his seat. The reports were consolidated. His lawyer cut in quickly. Consolidation is common practice to simplify parental communication. The room murmured. Patel scribbled something down. Then it was Anna Brooks's turn. She stood with a laptop, calm but firm. In my evaluation, I conducted 4 tests: pupillary light reflex, optokinetic nystagmus, visual evoked potentials, and full-field stimulus thresholds. Each test produced consistent, positive results. Pupils constricted, eyes tracked, brains responded, thresholds were detected. These are not random movements. These are objective measures of functional vision, approximately 30%. She turned her laptop to display graphs of waveforms, peaks rising like mountains. The room leaned forward. These boys are not totally blind. To deny this would be to deny neurophysiology itself. Marcus felt something crack inside him. 7 years of silence, of locked curtains, now unraveling in the form of lines on a graph. His sons had not been lost. They had been misjudged. Patel nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Brooks." She turned. "Mr. Ellington, your statement." Marcus stood. For once, he abandoned the polished tone of a CEO. His voice shook. "I am not here as a billionaire. I am here as a father. For 7 years, I lived in a house where laughter was replaced by sobs. Every doctor told me it was impossible. Every doctor shut the curtains tighter, and then a woman with no title, no power, asked the question none of you did: what if light could be gentle? And my sons laughed again. I have seen them turn towards sunlight. Don't tell me it was random. I was there. I watched." His voice cracked, but he did not sit down. "I don't want miracles. I want science. And I've seen it with my own eyes." Silence filled the room. Patel turned. "Miss Johnson." The air thickened. Every gaze shifted to Aisha. Collins's lawyer leaned forward like a predator smelling weakness. She rose slowly, notebook in hand. Her voice was steady, each word deliberate. "I am a black woman. I am also a janitor." Those 2 facts seem to matter more to some people here than the data in this book. But let me be clear, I don't heal diseases. I listen, I record. I teach children that they have the right to say stop. Everything I did with Caleb and Joshua was play, documented with respect and consent. And in that play, they showed light. Perception again and again. She placed the notebook on the table, flipping it open. Columns of notes stared back. Times, Lux estimates, responses. "This is not fantasy. This is record," Collins's lawyer pounced. "How many medical degrees do you have, Miss Johnson?" She looked him in the eye. "Enough to know that when a child says stop, you stop. Enough to log every trial, every response. Enough to treat them with dignity instead of dismissing them. The rest, Dr. Brooks covers." A ripple of laughter broke from the back of the room. Patel raised a hand for silence, though her lips twitched almost imperceptibly. Freeman leaned forward. "I witnessed the boys respond myself. Gentle light, gentle shadow, repeatable results. This is not false hope." Patel conferred briefly with her colleagues, then cleared her throat. "Here is the board's interim decision. 1. We deny Dr. Collins's request for an injunction. Home routines may continue under Dr. Brooks's supervision. 2. We see no evidence of unlicensed medical treatment, only sensory play documented with unusual precision. 3. We open an investigation into the initial diagnostic process, particularly the failure to follow up on neonatal light perception notes. 4. We caution all parties against media narratives that may harm these children further." The room exhaled as if a valve had been released. Marcus closed his eyes, relief flooding him. Anna squeezed his shoulder. Aisha, silent, simply closed her notebook, but across the table Collins sat motionless, his jaw clenched, his hand white-knuckled around a pen. He didn't look defeated. He looked calculating, because to men like him, one loss was only the opening move, and outside the board's chamber, the media was waiting. The board allowed hope to breathe, But Collins won't accept defeat. The media. Storm intensifies, strangers show up at the Ellingtons' door, and Aisha becomes a public target. This chapter needs to feel like the family's private miracle being dragged onto a battlefield lit by cameras, headlines, and lies. Every line must carry suspense, emotion, and the sense that danger is closing in. The Ellington penthouse had never been louder. Phones buzzed, emails poured in, and reporters clogged the street like ants swarming sugar. The board's ruling should have brought peace, but instead it lit a fire that Collins knew exactly how to feed. The morning after the hearing, Marcus's phone erupted before dawn. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Reckless maid leads billionaires' twins into false hope. Ellington empire in crisis. Unproven experiments endanger children. Each article carried the same poisonous rhythm. Anonymous. Experts. Warnings about trauma. And Collins's fingerprints hidden behind vague quotes. In the kitchen, Celia turned off the television in disgust. "They're not even saying your name, Aisha," she muttered. "Just maid. Over and over, like they want people to forget you're a person at all." Aisha didn't respond. She was at the table with her notebook open, pen scratching. Against paper, her shoulders square. Caleb and Joshua were eating oatmeal beside her, spooning slowly, their faces still bright from yesterday's progress. They didn't know what the headlines said. They didn't know the world outside was sharpening its knives. All they knew was the thin curtains letting in soft sunlight, and that it didn't hurt. But Marcus knew, and it burned. When he saw the headlines, his jaw tightened until it hurt. He had spent decades building his reputation, defending it against boardroom vultures, politicians, and envious rivals. Yet none of them had ever managed to cut him as deeply as 3 words on a screen. Reckless, black, maid. By mid-morning, the storm moved from screens to their doorstep. The elevator chimed, and 2 men in grey suits stepped out. They carried badges clipped to their pockets, metal glinting under the penthouse lights. "Dr. Hale, Mr. Klein, State Medical Board investigations," one announced. Their tone was sharp, official, the kind of voice designed to intimidate. Marcus frowned. "We weren't expecting anyone." "Emergency review," the taller one said briskly. "We need immediate access to the children." Aisha's eyes narrowed. She stepped forward, holding out her hand. "May I see your credentials?" The man flashed his badge too quickly. Just a flicker of metal and lamination before he tried to slide it back. But Aisha had spent years learning to see what others overlooked. She noticed the engraving, slightly shallow. The hotline number, italicized. Wrong. Too perfect. Too polished. "Give me a moment to verify," she said calmly. Pulling out her phone. "We don't have time for games," the man snapped. She dialed anyway. Moments later, Dr. Freeman's real voice came through the line. "Miss Johnson, there are no investigators scheduled. I don't know anyone named Hale or Klein. Do not let them in." Aisha's spine straightened. She hung up, then turned back. "To the men." Her voice was firm, unshaken. "The board confirms you don't exist. Leave this building." For the first time, their expressions cracked. Hale's jaw twitched. Klein muttered something under his breath. Marcus's security team stepped in, their heavy footsteps echoing against marble. Within minutes, the imposters were escorted out, their false badges useless. When the door closed, the air in the penthouse turned heavy. Celia leaned against the wall, pale. "Fake investigators? What's next?" Marcus's eyes were steel. "Collins isn't just fighting in the papers. He's testing us, pushing to see if we break." Aisha closed her notebook, her voice calm, but sharp. "Then we don't break. We record. We document every move they make." That night, the children played their light-shadow game as though nothing had changed. Caleb laughed when Aisha's hand blocked a sunbeam. Joshua whispered, "It's darker now," with a smile on his lips. The sound of their joy filled the room, but when the house grew quiet, Marcus stepped onto the balcony, his phone buzzing again. An email from his lawyer this time marked urgent. Attached was a copy of a new petition, Collins v. Ellington, filed with the state court, a request for an injunction to ban all home routines and a gag order to silence the family. Marcus's chest tightened. This wasn't just about science anymore. It was about power. Inside, Aisha wrote her last line of the day in her notebook. Light is real, prejudice is louder, but truth leaves footprints, and we will follow them. Down on the street, cameras still flashed. In a newsroom across town, Collins pressed send on another anonymous leak. And in the penthouse above it all, 2 children slept peacefully, dreaming of sun puddles, unaware that their laughter had become the spark of a war. The courthouse in downtown Manhattan rose like a stone giant, its marble columns catching the morning sun in a way that felt almost mocking. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward, camera shutters snapping with the frenzy of vultures circling over prey. Signs bobbed in the crowd, some scrawled with support for Marcus Ellington and his children, others parroting headlines, "Stop reckless experiments, protect the twins." Inside, the air was colder. The Supreme Court of the state had convened an emergency hearing on Collins's petition, an injunction to ban all home routines and a gag order to silence the family from speaking to the press. Marcus adjusted his tie as he entered, his face carved in stone. He had walked into boardrooms worth billions, into Senate chambers debating his technology, into negotiations where every word carried weight. But this felt heavier than all of them, because this wasn't about stock or mergers or market futures. This was about Caleb and Joshua. Aisha walked beside him, steady as always, her notebook pressed against her chest like a shield. Her plain blouse, her quiet dignity, contrasted sharply with the gleaming suits of Collins's entourage. Yet her presence drew attention. The reporters had named her the maid, but in this space she radiated something stronger, truth distilled into flesh and bone. Dr. Anna Brooks followed, carrying folders and medical charts, her face calm, but her eyes blazing with quiet fury. She had seen too many children written off, too many files stamped impossible when possibility still lived. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. An older man with silver hair and round glasses, his gavel struck 3 sharp beats against the desk. "Court is in session!" Collins's attorney rose first. He spoke with the smoothness of oil, words sliding into the air heavy with calculated drama. "Your Honor, the matter before us is not complicated. 2 children, tragically blind, have become subjects of unsupervised experiments conducted by an unqualified individual, a janitor no less, under the reckless eye of their father. These activities are unproven, unsafe, and harmful, not only to the children, but to the public trust in medical science. We request an immediate injunction to halt these so-called routines and a gag order to stop this family from confusing the public with their dangerous narrative." He sat, lips curling. Faintly, a ripple of unease swept through the gallery. Cameras tilted, pens scribbled, eyes flickered toward Marcus and Aisha as though waiting for them to crumble. Ava Reynolds, the civil rights attorney Marcus had hired, stood next. Her voice was sharp as glass. "Housekeeper, janitor, maid, we've heard these words tossed around as though a title defines a person's capacity to care. Let me be clear, Miss Johnson is not performing medicine. She's engaging in sensory play, prescribed under the supervision of Dr. Brooks, gentle light, gentle shadow, always consent-based, always documented. Not one shred of evidence shows harm to these children. In fact, the opposite. There is video proof of consistent responses, laughter, progress. What this case is truly about, Your Honor, is whether we let prejudice silence evidence." The judge peered over his glasses, his eyes unreadable. "Dr. Brooks, step forward." Anna rose, placing a file on the stand. I evaluated the children myself, using gold standard ophthalmologic tests, pupillary light reflex, optokinetic nystagmus, visual evoked potentials, full field stimulus thresholds. All results indicated functional vision around 30%. Not random, not chance, objective, measurable. If this court halts home routines now, the boys will lose progress already gained. That would be the true harm. She slid the graphs across the bench. The peaks and troughs glowed on the projector screen, undeniable as mountains rising from flat land. The courtroom shifted. Even some of Collins's supporters glanced sideways, murmuring. The judge turned. "Mr. Ellington?" Marcus stood, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice raw. "For 7 years, Your Honor, I was told my children would never see. I spent millions, 15 million, chasing doctors who gave me nothing but no. Do you know what no does to a child? It doesn't just blind their eyes, it blinds their spirit." Then one day, someone you'd all dismiss as the janitor, opened a curtain just enough for sunlight to fall across the floor. And my sons turned toward it. They laughed, they saw. For the first time, they saw. If you want to call that reckless, then call me reckless, but I won't let you shut that curtain again. Gasps filled the gallery. Even the judge leaned back, in blinking slowly. Finally, it was Aisha's turn. She rose, calm as a tide rolling in, and walked to the center of the room. Her notebook trembled only slightly in her hand. She spoke softly at first, so the room leaned in to hear. "I don't pretend to be a doctor. I never have. I'm a black woman who works hard, who has cared for people all her life. I listen, I watch, I write. Every session with Caleb and Joshua, I wrote it down. The time, the light, the shadow, the response. Gentle, safe, always their choice. That's not medicine, that's respect. That's giving children who were told never a chance to feel maybe." Collins's lawyer pounced. "Do you realize you are only a—" The judge slammed his gavel. "Counselor! Enough!" His voice cut through the chamber like thunder. He turned back to Aisha. "Continue." Her eyes lifted, unflinching. "Titles don't move pupils. Light does. And truth, Your Honor, doesn't need a diploma to shine." Silence followed. Not courtroom silence, but the kind that crackles in the bones, a silence heavy with the weight of something irreversible. The judge leaned forward, hands folded. "Does the plaintiff have any specific evidence that these routines have harmed the children?" Collins's lawyer fumbled. "Experts. Say, I didn't ask about experts in the abstract," the judge snapped. "I asked about these children. There was nothing." The judge tapped his gavel once. "The injunction is denied. The gag order is denied. The routines may continue under Dr. Brooks's supervision. A special master will review logs periodically. This court will not strip these children of progress made. Reputation does not stand above truth." The gavel fell. The ruling echoed like a bell. Relief washed over Marcus so hard he nearly collapsed. Anna exhaled, her shoulders sagging. Aisha closed her notebook, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes glistened. Across the aisle, Collins sat rigid, his face pale, his jaw twitching. His defeat was undeniable, but in his silence there was no surrender, only calculation. Because even as truth claimed the courtroom, the war outside, on the streets, in the media, in the shadows, was only beginning. The courtroom doors swing open, and the fight spills into the streets, the media, and the hearts of ordinary people. This is where Aisha's voice, meant only for 2 children in a darkened room, begins to resonate across the country. The chapter must feel like the private miracle of Caleb and Joshua being dragged onto the national stage, turning into a battle between truth and prejudice. When the gavel struck and the ruling came down, the Ellington family thought they would at least have a moment to breathe. They were wrong. The moment Marcus, Aisha, and Dr. Brooks stepped out of the courthouse, the world was waiting with teeth bared. Cameras exploded in bursts of light, microphones shoved forward like weapons, voices clashing into a storm. "Mr. Ellington, do you admit to endangering your sons?" "Miss Johnson, what qualifies you to be experimenting with children?" "Dr. Brooks, are you endorsing unlicensed treatment?" The questions were not questions at all. They were accusations, sharpened to cut. Security tried to clear a path, but the crowd pressed closer. Aisha shielded the boys, her hand firm on Caleb's shoulder, her notebook clutched tight in the other hand. Marcus raised his voice, calm but commanding. "We have nothing to hide. Gentle light, gentle play, always safe, that's the truth. Now let us through." But the soundbite was swallowed in chaos. By evening, the headlines twisted again. "Billionaire beats injunction, but is he playing with fire? Janitor defies doctors, a new age of reckless hope." On one network, Collins appeared in silhouette, his voice distorted. "False hope is the cruelest experiment of all." His words dripped poison, even as he refused to show his face. But truth has its own way of breaking through. That night, as Marcus sat at the penthouse dining table, exhausted, Aisha uploaded a single clip to the family's new verified page. No grand speech, no editing. Just a 30-second video, Caleb and Joshua sitting on the rug, a shaft of sunlight spilling through the curtain. Aisha's hand passed across it, blocking half the beam. Caleb's head turned instantly. "Darker," Joshua giggled. "Brighter." Now, the caption was simple. "Light can be gentle." By midnight, the video had been shared 10,000 times. By morning, 100,000. By the end of the week, millions. Parents began flooding the comments. "My daughter was told the same. Total blindness. But when I opened the window, she turned her face. They told us never. But we saw something too." Families from Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles, even small towns in Kansas and Mississippi, mothers, fathers, grandparents began uploading shaky phone videos. Children smiling at sunbeams, reaching for shadows, blinking at lamps. The internet gave their stories wings, and for the first time, the Ellingtons realized they weren't alone. But Collins was watching too, and he was furious. Behind the glass walls of his institute, he met with his attorneys. "They're turning this into a movement," he snapped, slamming his fist against the table. "It has to stop. Push harder, leak everything, discredit her, discredit him. If the court won't silence them, the public will." Within days, another wave of headlines hit. Anonymous sources, children at risk of trauma. Janitor or Messiah, the dangerous cult of Aisha Johnson. But something unexpected happened. Instead of weakening her, the attacks only made Aisha's calm strength shine brighter. At the penthouse, she continued her work exactly as before. Notebook open, data logged. Caleb and Joshua laughing, learning, using their stop word whenever they needed. She ignored the noise, speaking only when the children asked their gentle questions. Yet every so often, she would catch a glimpse of the headlines on Marcus's phone, the sting in his jaw, the fury in his eyes. She would lay her hand over his, steady, grounding. "The louder the lies, the clearer the truth needs to be. We have the truth." One evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, a woman's voice trembling. "Mr. Ellington, my name is Olivia Park. I used to work at Collins's Institute. I can't stay silent anymore. I saw the reports. I saw how they erased the notes. There was always a line, light perception possible, but they were told to remove it. Don't confuse parents, they said. I kept copies. I have proof." Marcus froze. "Proof?" "Yes. Audit logs, emails, dates, names. They covered it up." His hand shook as he passed the phone to Aisha. Her voice was calm, steady. "You're safe with us, Olivia. We'll protect you. Bring everything. Bring the truth." When the call ended, the room fell into silence. Celia whispered from the doorway, her voice breaking. "If this is true, It means they didn't just lie to you. They lied to every parent who ever trusted them. Marcus sat down heavily, his chest heaving. For 7 years, he had lived in the prison of that word. Impossible. Now, someone had just handed him the key. Aisha opened her notebook, writing a single line at the bottom of the page. The cracks are widening, and through them, light is pouring. Down in the streets, reporters still shouted, headlines still twisted, Collins still plotted. But upstairs, in the Ellington penthouse, something larger than scandal or smear campaigns was being born. It wasn't just about 2 boys anymore. It was about every child dismissed by arrogance, every parent silenced by authority, every caregiver told their voice didn't count. And Aisha knew, when voices like that rise together, no curtain, no matter how heavy, can keep the light out. When the whispers of conspiracy become undeniable evidence, and Olivia Park steps fully into the spotlight as a whistleblower. It should feel like a thriller, yet remain grounded in the emotional heart of the story. 2 boys who just wanted to see light. The Ellington penthouse was no longer a house, it was a bunker. Since the court victory, reporters camped outside. The lobby, day and night, their lenses aimed upward like hunters waiting for prey. Even delivery drivers found themselves interrogated. The front desk fielded anonymous calls filled with threats, but inside those guarded walls, life went on. Caleb and Joshua tracing sunbeams across the rug, Aisha jotting careful notes, Marcus working the phones with a fierceness that blended fatherhood with CEO precision. It was in this tense rhythm that Olivia Park arrived. She came through the service entrance late in the evening, hood pulled low, shoulders tense. Aisha opened the door herself, ushering her in with a warmth that softened the sharp edges of fear. Olivia was younger than Marcus expected, maybe early 30s, her Korean-American features pale from weeks of anxiety. She clutched a worn leather, big like a lifeline. Inside, the penthouse glowed with warm lamps, jazz humming low from Celia's speaker in the kitchen. For a moment, Olivia just stood there, watching Caleb and Joshua sit by the curtain, whispering and laughing about sun puddles. Tears filled her eyes before she even spoke. "I saw too many children like them," she said softly. "Too many parents told, never. Too many reports scrubbed clean." Marcus gestured her to the table. "Show us!" Her hands trembled as she unzipped the bag. Out came printed screenshots, highlighted email chains, and a small USB sealed in a plastic case. "The audit logs," she whispered. "They record everything, every keystroke, every deletion. I was there when Dr. Collins changed the note. The original NICU record said light perception possible, follow-up required. Weeks later, that line vanished. He replaced it with total cortical blindness. No follow-up, no second opinion, just erased." Aisha leaned forward, her pen stilling over her notebook. "And this happened more than once?" Olivia nodded, swallowing hard. "It was policy. They called it parent simplification. Don't confuse them with maybes. Don't complicate the prognosis. Total, final, easier for the families, they said, easier for the clinic." She paused, her voice cracking. "But it wasn't easier, it was a lie." Marcus pressed a hand to his mouth, his breath unsteady. For years he had believed the weight of never was an unshakable truth. Now, staring at the highlighted lines of an erased note, he realized never had been manufactured, deliberate, cold. Celia touched Olivia's hand, steadying her. "You've carried this alone long enough, you don't have to anymore." But Olivia's fear wasn't only for herself. "They'll come for me. Collins has lawyers. He has money. They'll paint me as disgruntled, unstable, anything to bury. This..." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. "Then let them try, you're not alone. You've got me, Aisha, Dr. Brooks, and the truth. And truth is stronger than their money." As if summoned by the word, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was Ava Reynolds, their attorney. They switched to speaker, And Olivia laid out everything: the logs, the emails, the erased lines, the verbal orders. Ava listened in silence, then spoke with a steadiness that filled the room. This is bigger than malpractice. This is systemic negligence. If what Olivia has is real, and I believe it is, we're talking about a class action. Families across the country. Every child mislabeled, every chance stolen. But first, we need to protect her. Malik and I will file for whistleblower privilege first thing tomorrow. Aisha's hand tightened around her notebook. The room had shifted. This was no longer only about Caleb and Joshua. It was about hundreds of children whose futures had been sealed by the stroke of a key. Later, when the boys were asleep, the adults remained at the table. Olivia recounted the night she sat at her desk at Collins's institute, watching notes vanish from charts, her stomach twisting with guilt. One day, I asked my supervisor why. He said, "Parents don't want maybe. They want certainty." But certainty was a lie, and I watched children flinch under bright lamps that should have been soft. I watched parents walk out with tears while the truth stayed locked in the system. Aisha whispered, almost to herself. Light can be gentle, but lies never are. Silence hung heavy. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with restless neon, the city that never slept, unaware that inside this high-rise, the walls of a medical empire had just cracked. Before Olivia left that night, Aisha wrapped her in a shawl and walked her to the elevator. "Courage doesn't feel like strength," she told her quietly. "It feels like fear that walks anyway. You've walked. That's enough." When the doors slid shut, Aisha returned to the study and opened her notebook. On a fresh page, she wrote in bold letters, Day 1, whistleblower testimony, audit logs, proof of erasure, a lie exposed. She underlined it twice. Then she added one. Final note, small and steady, the storm is here, but so is the light. The courtroom becomes the battlefield. The audit logs the weapons. Olivia, the unlikely hero, and Aisha, the moral compass that cuts through lies. It must feel like the world holding its breath as truth fights its way through smoke and deception. The courthouse was packed like a theater on opening night. Rows of benches overflowed with parents, advocates, reporters, and curious onlookers, all hungry for spectacle. The marble walls, normally silent, now buzzed with whispers. The Ellington case, the blind twins, the maid, the billionaire, the whistleblower. Marcus sat tall at the defense table, jaw clenched, dark suit immaculate. To his left, Aisha sat with her notebook closed, but her hands folded on top of it, a quiet strength radiating from her stillness. Dr. Brooks shuffled through charts and medical reports, her professional calm masking the storm underneath. Olivia Park sat further down, pale but resolute, her leather bag at her feet like a soldier's shield. Across the aisle, Henry Collins adjusted his tie. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed the restless flicker of a man who felt control slipping away. Beside him, his attorneys whispered strategies, sliding papers across the table like blades hidden in silk. When the judge entered, the room fell into silence. The gavel struck, echoing sharp as a gunshot. This hearing will review allegations of negligent misdiagnosis, systemic cover-up, and defamation, the judge announced. We will hear testimony and evidence from both parties. Counsel, proceed. Collins's lawyer rose first. He was sleek, deliberate, his voice dripping authority. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not be distracted by sentimental storytelling or social media noise. This case is about science. The children in question were diagnosed by a team of 15 specialists as cortically blind. That diagnosis was sound, professional, and final. What followed, the reckless interference of an unqualified domestic worker, was dangerous, misleading, and cruel. We will show this court that any so-called evidence of improvement is nothing more than coincidence and parental desperation. He gestured toward Aisha with a sharp flick, as though reducing her entire existence to a smear on the floor. Marcus's fist curled under the table. Aisha didn't flinch. When it was their turn, Ava Reynolds rose. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. This case is not about reckless hope. It is about reckless certainty. Certainty forced on parents, certainty written into charts, certainty used to silence the very possibility of light. Today, you will see that certainty was a lie, and you will see who paid the price. She called the first witness, Olivia Park. Olivia rose, clutching her bag as though it held her soul. The bailiff swore her in, and she took her seat. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. I worked at Collins Vision Institute for 4 years. I saw how diagnoses were written. I saw how notes were changed. The lawyer leaned forward, sneering. Changed or clarified? Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers, screenshots of electronic medical records. Highlighted lines glowed yellow against the white. This is the original NICU note from Caleb and Joshua Ellington's file. Light perception possible, follow-up required. Dated March 21st, signed by Dr. Henry Collins. This, she lifted another page, is the same file 1 week later. The line is gone, replaced with total cortical blindness. Final. The audit log records the deletion at 10:42 a.m. User ID H. Collins. The courtroom rippled with gasps. The lawyer leapt up. Objection! These are stolen records. Ava cut him off smoothly. Chain of custody is documented. Ms. Park submitted these materials under whistleblower protections. Every timestamp. Verified by an independent forensic team. The evidence is clean. The judge nodded. Objection overruled. Proceed. Olivia's voice grew stronger. This wasn't an isolated case. We were told, don't confuse parents with maybes. Don't complicate the prognosis. I raised concerns. I was told to fall in line. Parents left with tears while the truth stayed buried in the system. She looked straight at Collins. You told us certainty was mercy. It was never mercy. It was erasure. Collins's face tightened, but he forced a thin smile. Clinical. Judgment requires simplification, he said, rising suddenly. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, but Collins pressed forward, addressing the judge directly. What Ms. Park calls erasure, I call clarity. Parents can't handle shades of grey. They need firm answers, Aisha stood. She hadn't been called yet, but her voice cut through the air. No, doctor, parents don't need lies. Children don't need silence. They need consent. They need patience. They need light that doesn't hurt. You gave them darkness because it was easier for you. The judge didn't silence her. The room held still, every ear bent toward her. Collins's lawyer tried to recover. Your Honor, with all due respect, we cannot allow this trial to turn into a morality play. The judge leaned forward. Sometimes, Counselor, medicine without morality is malpractice. And then came the coup de grace. Ava cued the monitor. The screen flickered and a video played. Caleb and Joshua on the rug, sunlight spilling through a slit in the curtain. Aisha's hand blocked the beam halfway. Caleb's head turned. Darker, Joshua laughed. Brighter. Their voices were clear, innocent, undeniable. The courtroom watched in silence, save for the quiet sound of children discovering light. When the clip ended, the special master appointed by the court rose. His tone was clinical, detached, but it struck harder than any plea. In repeated trials, with controlled conditions, the children responded consistently to visual stimuli. Latency decreased over time. These are not random head turns. These are functional visual responses. In my professional opinion, the initial diagnosis was incorrect. Silence. The judge exhaled, heavy, deliberate. He turned his gaze on Collins. Doctor, this court finds substantial evidence of diagnostic negligence, suppression of follow-up, and deliberate misrepresentation. The case will proceed to full liability trial. In the meantime, Home routines will continue under clinical supervision. And as for the term reckless maid, his voice hardened, I advise you, doctor, to remember that truth cares little for the titles of those who speak it. The gavel struck. Collins's mask cracked. For the first time, he looked cornered. Truly cornered. Marcus reached for Aisha's hand under the table, gripping it tightly. Olivia sat shaking, tears streaming down her face, not of fear but release. And Caleb and Joshua, too young to understand the weight of what had just happened, laughed softly in the hallway, their small voices echoing down the marble corridors like the purest evidence of all. Aisha closed her notebook later that night. With a single line written in ink, the courtroom saw what the children already knew. Light does not ask permission to be real. This is where everything converges: justice, collapse, reform, and the emotional release of a story that carried so much pain and suspense. It must be explosive yet tender, an ending that feels earned, powerful, and unforgettable. Let's step into it. The verdict spread across the nation like wildfire. By the time the Ellingtons left the courthouse, the headlines were already flashing on screens in Times Square. Audit logs reveal medical cover-up. Whistleblower confirms diagnostic erasures. Ellington twins, not blind, but one headline struck deeper than all the rest. Truth at last, the reckless maid was right. Marcus read it aloud in the back seat of the black SUV as they drove home. His chest rose with a strange, long-forgotten feeling. Relief, yes, but also something heavier, something like release. For years he had been carrying Simone's ghost, his children's pain, and the crushing weight of impossible. Now, with every mile closer to the penthouse, that weight loosened. But for Dr. Henry Collins, the world was collapsing. News crews camped outside his institute, shoving microphones at any staff member who dared walk out. Parents stormed lobbies demanding second opinions. State investigators rolled out subpoenas like war drums, demanding 7 years of audit logs. From every affiliated hospital, the Institute's board convened an emergency session, their polished voices cold with betrayal. Collins sat in his office, tie loosened, staring at a single phrase on the subpoena: potential systemic negligence. The whistleblower's words had gone viral. Olivia Park's trembling testimony was replayed across networks, her voice carrying, like a war cry for every parent ever silenced by absolutes. She was no longer afraid. She was a face of courage. Messages poured into her inbox from mothers in Texas, fathers in Chicago, grandparents in Atlanta. My child was told never to. How do I know it wasn't a lie? Inside the Ellington penthouse, however, life carried on in its own quiet rhythm. Curtains remained drawn thin, schedules were taped neatly to the refrigerator. Caleb and Joshua laughed in the glow of sun puddles, their small feet chasing shadows across the floor. For them, the storm outside was just noise. For Marcus and Aisha, it was the sound of a new world being born. Yet, the final shock still waited to surface. 2 weeks after the hearing, the independent forensic team released its full report. Buried in the logs wasn't just erasure of light perception notes, it was evidence of systemic fraud. Each time Collins's team declared a child totally blind, billing codes shifted, triggering costly interventions, devices, and therapies that parents were told were necessary. The certainty wasn't just negligence, it was profit. Millions made from despair. When the story broke, America erupted. Congressional hearings were announced. Civil rights groups joined hands with medical ethicists. Lawsuits multiplied. The Collins Vision Institute's name became synonymous with betrayal. Collins himself was indicted on charges of fraud, negligence, and defamation. The nation's anger, however, found its balance in the Ellington twins. Their story became a symbol, not just of hope, but of resistance. Videos of Caleb turning toward a beam of light were replayed alongside testimonies from parents across the country. Late-night hosts, journalists, and everyday people repeated, The phrase Aisha had whispered to the boys, "Light can be gentle," it became a movement, and then came the greatest shock of all. The American Academy of Pediatric Ophthalmology, embarrassed by its silence, issued new mandatory protocols. Every congenital blindness diagnosis must now include at least 3 independent evaluations, explicit uncertainty ranges when light perception is noted, mandatory follow-ups before declaring total blindness, training modules on bias, race, and caregiver collaboration, and tucked into the announcement, one final acknowledgement. The Ellington case revealed systemic failures that denied children their chance at sight. Care work, regardless of title, is skilled work when grounded in respect and evidence. The Academy honors Aisha Johnson for her role in restoring light not only to Caleb and Joshua, but to countless families across the nation. When Marcus read that aloud, the room went silent. Aisha, normally so steady, finally let tears fall. For years, she had been the help, dismissed, mocked, underestimated. Now her name was written in the record of reform. That night, the Ellington family gathered on the balcony overlooking Central Park. Celia brought out apple pie, Martha set down glasses of sweet tea, and the boys ran barefoot on the rug. Caleb pointed suddenly, his small hand trembling. "Daddy, the lights in the park, they sparkle." Marcus froze, staring at his son's face tilted toward the shimmering lamps below. Joshua giggled beside him. "And the sky, it's darker than the lights, I can tell." A hush fell. These weren't tests, these weren't protocols. This was life, unfolding in its own miraculous way. Marcus pulled his boys close, his throat thick. "Yes, sons, that's the city. That's our light." Aisha stood at the railing, her notebook closed at last. For months, she had filled its pages with data, observations, and whispers of hope. Tonight she wrote only one final line. "Science does not hate black hands, prejudice does. But when truth shines, prejudice cannot endure." Behind them, the city glowed, neon and golden, restless and alive. The world had changed in boardrooms and courtrooms, but here, on this balcony, the only light that mattered was the gentle shimmer in 2 children's eyes. The curtains, once a monument to despair, now hung open. And for the first time in 7 years, laughter spilled out of the Ellington home, bright, unbroken, and free.